Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Washington Brief for Tuesday, August 6th. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Jenkins, president of the Washington Times Foundation, which sponsors this webcast. Dr. Jenkins is also chairman of the Washington Times Holdings, the LLC that owns the Times news organization. He has led many successful fact-finding trips to Korea for policy experts and peace initiatives to the Middle East for the Universal Peace Federation. Dr. Jenkins, welcome.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you for all you do for the Washington Brief. Our program today is the Middle East conflicts, dangerous geopolitical tentacles. It may be that there are no more local conflicts. Every significant fight has the potential for ideological interests, supply chains, and consequences that spread around the world. That makes these times extremely dangerous. Pipelines running between North Korea, Iran, Russia, and so forth, and China need to be watched, analyzed, and confronted by the free world. Today, we have an outstanding guest speaker, and I would like to introduce him at this time, Ambassador Haim Koren, his former Israeli diplomat who served in the Israeli Foreign Ministry for 35 years, having served as an ambassador to Egypt and South Sudan during the previous decade. During his tenure with the Foreign Ministry, he had various positions in Israel and abroad, and many diplomatic capacities in the US and worldwide. Ambassador Koren earned his PhD degree and is recognized for his expertise in the Arab world, Middle East, and East Africa. He was an honorary member of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at the University of Chicago, and also an instructor at the National Defense College of Israel. He has given lectures and seminars on the ideology of radical Islam, the global dimension of foreign policy in Israel, and other topics framed by his geopolitical perspective. He taught at the University of Haifa in Middle Eastern history and communications, and he serves on numerous advisory boards and research, political research institutes and universities in several countries, and has been teaching at the Reichman University. Also, our guest panelist, who is regular to the program, Dr. Alexandre Mansourov, is an adjunct professor of security studies at Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University in Washington. He is also an adjunct professor of Korean Studies at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University and at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. Our moderator is Ambassador Joseph DeTrani. Ambassador DeTrani is a commentator on security issues. Formerly, Ambassador DeTrani was special envoy for six-party talks with North Korea, the director of the National Counterproliferation Center, and associate director of national intelligence. He's widely published from the Washington Times to all major publications in the United States, especially on intelligence. Welcome, Ambassador DeTrani. We're going to have a great show.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. It's an honor being here. And Ambassador Koren, it's an honor to have you on as our guest speaker today. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive in the Middle East. Normally, this program, we focus a lot on the Indo-Pacific region and a lot on the Korean Peninsula. We'll tie those pieces in together with the Middle East today. So today, it's a deep dive into the Middle East, and we're very fortunate to have Ambassador Koren with us. So over to you, Ambassador Koren.
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. I'm happy to be here. And we'll talk about the war that has been going on in Israel from October the 7th in the Middle East, but we also refer to it as a microcosmos of processes that are taking place around the world right now. And some of the main actors in those conflicts that are happening right now are heavily involved in this conflict as well. I would say even more than that. Not only they involved, they are initiated this war in order to promote interest and using local actors such as Hamas and Israel in order to enable them to use their own interest around the world, and specifically in this timing because they prepared for it for a long time. And I'll later on will elaborate on that in a more focused manner. We are suffering, of course, as Israeli because of this war, but if we're checking changes in the world, and we have here experts on those issues, we can identify some basic turning points or benchmarks in history from the mid 50s in the world namely after World War II, and the big changes not only in the politics, namely joining two blocs after World War II, the Eastern Bloc headed by the USSR and the Western Bloc headed by the US, but not less than that, the unalignment bloc, who is very significant, and the changing later on along the end of the 20th century, which have been changing, in fact, borders and identities around the world. And if you add to the dynamics of very quick globalization recently, let's see from the beginning of this millennium, and the changes, the real deep changes of identities, you get a very deep changing in the world, and the world structure in terms of geopolitical manners. That's very important to understand. It's not a coincidence that in the end, or in the 90s of the 20th century, a big debate occurred. It started with Fukuyama in his well-known theory about the end of history, and kept on going by Huntington, which actually was the first to state that the world changed in terms of identities. No more nation state like it used to be in the 19th century, namely the Spring of the People, 1848, and the French Revolution, and later on, definition of religious and territory that shifted from Europe to the Middle East, Africa, and elsewhere, but also changes of the belonging of person, which is very important, and we understand it right now when we see what's happening in this war. For example, what happened when Iran, China, and Russia planned a long time their high-tech abilities of involving by technology in order to, in fact, to affect results of elections in the US, in Britain, in France, I assume also here in Israel, and they make it work later on many issues, and they guided the Hamas when they started their attack, the brutal attack at October the 7th. Right after the attack, immediately in the social media, the slogans and the messages of the Hamas came into being before even Israel retaliated in any way. And this message, using the changes in the world, like young students, even in Ivy League universities, that not really coming to learn in a deep manner what's going on, and they're using slogans without even knowing what they mean. And all of a sudden, the local attack of Hamas on Israel became a global, due to the fact that it was supported by China, of course, by Iran, and by Russia. That means that Hamas didn't do anything without at least a knowledge or guidance of Iran, first and foremost, and support for the first time, very active support of China, and of course, the support of Russia. Now, because there's so many details about the war that's going on right now here, let me speak a little bit about the margins of this war. You probably remember the story of Ukraine, which happened 2 years ago, that Putin decided against all odds to go to war in Ukraine. And you might ask yourself, why? You know, according to the theories, if you are threatening somebody and you are successful, it's better when you actually do the invasion. So why Putin was insisting to open a war against Ukraine? Putin working for the last 20 years on supplying to be a hub of the energy to Europe. He signed agreements with Angela Merkel to be the main supplier of energy to Europe. And he worked with oligarchs on that for many times. He's taking most of the energy from Central Asia and from the Middle East, Iran, Uzbekistan, and other places. And he's supposed to shift it and make a whole lot of money out of it. Now, what happened is that till the Obama administration that started to be independent in terms of energy, America didn't need energy from Saudi Arabia anymore. So there was a story of tension between America and Saudi Arabia in the issue of Khashoggi story that was supposed to be in the responsibility of Mohammed bin Salman, as we call it, MBS. So when this crisis started between Russia and Ukraine, President Biden asked MBS to help Europe to supply their needs in this time. And in the beginning, he refused, but later on, he said, okay, I'll help you with that. But we all need to understand that that was making Russia very angry and China very angry. And then President Biden came with the right idea to come closer to Saudi Arabia and to say, why don't Saudi Arabia will make good relations with Israel, and that by that we can create some kind of bypass to the Russian ability to supply the needs of Europe. And if Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, through Jordan and Israel, with the participation of Egypt, Cyprus, and through Greek to supply the needs for Europe, actually we won't need Putin with his bad intention to take the lead on that and the money on that. That was a great idea, but the Chinese and the Russians didn't like it. Now, I don't want to go now to the tension between China and the US. You are dealing with that a lot, I can assume. And we can see it in the way they are standing against each other in the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea and Malacca Bay, how the Chinese and the Americans are coming in a story about the control of one of the major places of transition, of transformation of goods in the world. And China decided all of a sudden to use the war in Yemen that started in 2015, Iranian using Houthis as proxies, and say, okay, we'll come and mediate between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now, for those who happen not to know, Iran is leading the Shiite world within Islam, which is a minority in Islam, and they are fight for hegemony in Islam from 7th century between the Shiite faction, who is less than 15% of the Muslim, and the main center of Islam in Mecca and Medina, which is in Saudi Arabia. And the Chinese came and said, let us mediate between you. And of course, China got more energy, both from Iran and from Saudi Arabia. And they succeeded to come to an agreement, and that was only a few months before October the 7th, okay? Now, China, for the first time, started to take an active role, political active role, in these